September 1916. The skies above Verdun, France, where thousands of men died on the ground below, a new sound echoed through the clouds. It was different from the sputtering rotary engines that had dominated aerial combat for the past 2 years. This was a deeper, more powerful roar, the sound of a water-cooled Hispano-Suiza V8 engine driving a French fighter that would change everything the Germans thought they knew about air combat. The SPAD XIII had arrived, and German pilots, accustomed to dominating the skies with their Halberstadt and Albatros fighters, were about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating French engineering. The Fokker scourge of 1915 and early 1916 had given German pilots an intoxicating sense of superiority. Their synchronized machine guns, firing through the propeller arc, had turned Allied reconnaissance aircraft into easy prey. German aces like Max Immelmann and Oswald Bülke had become household names, their victories mounting as they shot down nimble but fragile Allied fighters and lumbering observation aircraft with almost casual efficiency. The Germans had grown comfortable in their dominance, confident that their technical superiority and tactical prowess would carry them through the war. Then came the Nieuport fighters, small, agile sesquiplanes that began to challenge German control of the air. But these too had their limitations, fragile construction that made them vulnerable to the German practice of diving attacks, wings that could break under stress, limited firepower. German pilots respected the Nieuports but knew how to beat them. Circle above, dive on the tail, fire a quick burst, then zoom away using speed built in the dive. The mathematics of aerial combat seemed settled. Favour speed and altitude, exploit the fragility of enemy aircraft, dominate through superior tactics. The French aircraft industry, however, had been quietly working on something different, a fighter built around the revolutionary new Hispano-Suiza 8A engine, designed by Swiss engineer Marc Berkicht. This water-cooled V8 produced 150 horsepower, exceptional power for 1916, and unlike the rotary engines that powered most fighters, it didn't limit the aircraft's speed or create torque problems. Louis Bechereau, the chief designer at Société pour l'Aviation et ses Dérives, had recognized the potential immediately. He designed an airframe around this engine that prioritized structural strength and speed over maneuverability. When the prototype first flew in April 1916, test pilots were immediately impressed by its straight-line performance. It was fast, reaching 119 miles per hour at sea level, faster than anything the Germans had. More importantly, it was strong, built of wood and fabric like other aircraft of the era, but with a robust internal structure that could withstand punishment. The first SPAD XIIs reached French squadrons in September 1916, right in the middle of the Verdun campaign. German pilots, watching these new fighters enter combat, initially dismissed them with the casual arrogance of veterans facing another Allied attempt to challenge their supremacy. The SPAD looked ungainly compared to the sleek Nieuports, with a blocky fuselage and what appeared to be excessive structure. German pilots joked about the French building furniture instead of fighters, calling them flying warehouses, heavy machines that would be easy prey in a turning fight. Lieutenant Wilhelm Frankel of Jasta 4 wrote in his diary after his first encounter with a SPAD, quote, "Saw one of the new French machines today. Looks like they strapped wings to a delivery truck. We chased it for a few minutes, but it simply flew away in a straight line. No sport in that. When we catch one in a proper fight, it will be an easy victory," end quote. This confidence proved dangerously misplaced. The SPAD XII's first significant impact came during the Battle of the Somme in late 1916. German pilots attempting their standard diving attacks found themselves facing an opponent that refused to play by the established rules. SPADs didn't break apart under stress. They dove faster than the Germans could follow, and when German pilots tried to follow them down and pull out, the SPADs would simply extend away, using their superior speed to escape. More frustratingly, when SPADs attacked from above, they came in fast, fired their single Vickers machine gun with deadly accuracy, and disappeared before German pilots could react. One of the first French pilots to master the SPAD was a young officer named Georges Guynemer, already an ace flying Nieuports. When he received his first SPAD in September 1916, he immediately understood its potential. Guynemer was not interested in graceful dogfights. He wanted to kill Germans efficiently. The SPAD's combination of speed, structural strength and diving ability suited his aggressive style perfectly. By December 1916, Guynemer had 25 victories, many scored in his SPAD, and German pilots who survived encounters with him reported a disturbing pattern. He attacked from advantageous positions using speed and altitude, struck with precision, and was gone before they could react. Hauptmann Rudolf Berthold, commanding Jaster 18, issued a tactical memo to his pilots in January 1917 after several encounters with SPADs, quote, "The new French fighters must be engaged with caution. They possess remarkable speed in level flight and extraordinary diving characteristics. Attempting to follow them in a dive is inadvisable as they can outrun our aircraft. Engagement should be initiated only from superior altitude and with numerical advantage. Isolated encounters should be avoided." End quote. This was a significant shift in tone from the earlier mockery. By early 1917, the SPAD XII had proven itself in combat, but German intelligence was already noting its limitations. It was relatively heavy on the controls, it climbed slowly at low altitudes, and it carried only a single machine gun. When German pilots encountered SPADs in circumstances that negated their speed advantage, in tight spaces where maneuverability mattered, or in surprise encounters where the SPAD couldn't build speed, the outcome often favoured the Germans. The Albatros D.V, introduced in late 1916, could outclimb and outturn the SPAD XII at medium altitudes. German confidence began to recover. Perhaps the SPAD was simply another Allied fighter, effective in certain situations but ultimately beatable through proper tactics. Then the French completely changed the equation. In April 1917, the SPAD XIII took to the skies, and everything German pilots thought they had learned about fighting SPADs became obsolete. The SPAD XIII was powered by a geared Hispano-Suiza 8B engine producing 200 horsepower. Later variants would reach 235 horsepower, giving it a power-to-weight ratio that exceeded anything the Germans had. More significantly, it carried 2 Vickers machine guns, doubling its firepower. The prototype had flown on April 4, 1917, and by late May, production aircraft were reaching French squadrons. German pilots first encountered the SPAD XIII during the height of what they called Bloody April, a period when German fighters were inflicting terrible losses on British and French air forces. The initial encounters seemed to confirm German superiority. The new SPADs were still not as manoeuvrable as German fighters, still relied on speed and diving ability. But then something began to change. The SPAD XIII could climb to 60,100 feet in just 4.5 minutes, faster than the Albatros D.V that was Germany's frontline fighter in mid-1917. At altitudes above 15,000 feet, the SPAD's performance advantage became overwhelming. German pilots found themselves in a nightmare scenario. SPADs could climb above them, attack from altitude using speed and superior firepower, and escape before German fighters could react. Oberleutnant Ernst Udet, who had become Germany's second highest scoring ace with 62 victories, described his first encounter with a SPAD XIII in June 1917, quote, "I was at 18,000 feet, which I thought gave me absolute command of the situation. Then I saw them above me. 3 SPADs at what must have been 20,000 feet or higher. They rolled over and came down like falling stones. I turned to meet them, but they were so fast, the leader fired, and I felt strikes on my aircraft. Then they were past me and climbing away. I tried to follow, but my Albatros struggled in the thin air while they climbed, as if pulled by invisible wires. It was the first time in the war I felt truly helpless in the air." End quote. The twin machine guns of the SPAD XIII also changed the dynamics of aerial combat. German pilots were accustomed to opponents with single guns, or the occasionally unreliable British Lewis guns mounted on the upper wing. The SPAD's synchronized twin Vickers guns created a cone of fire that made deflection shooting far more effective. French aces flying SPADs began racking up multiple kills in single missions, not through extended dogfights, but through precise, high-speed attacks that gave German pilots no time to react. René Fonck, who had become the highest-scoring Allied ace with 75 confirmed victories, flew the SPAD XIII for most of his combat career. His precision and efficiency were legendary. On one mission in May 1918, he shot down 6 German aircraft in a single day, expending only 27 rounds of ammunition. Fonck understood the SPAD's strength perfectly: use altitude to control the engagement, use speed to dictate when to fight and when to disengage, use the twin guns to make every shot count. German pilots found themselves unable to counter this combination effectively. The mathematics of aerial combat had shifted fundamentally. Where German fighters had once dominated through superior position and numbers, SPADs could now climb above German formations, attack at will, and escape unscathed. German pilots who tried to dogfight SPADs in turning engagements might occasionally win, but those victories came at a terrible cost. While they were engaged with one SPAD, others would dive on them from above. By late 1917, German tactical manuals were devoting entire sections to countering SPADs. Avoid engagement unless at equal or superior altitude, attack only with numerical superiority, do not follow SPADs in dives, engage only if you can force them into turning combat. These defensive instructions represented a complete reversal from the offensive confidence of 1916. The arrival of American squadrons equipped with SPADs in 1918 only intensified German problems. The United States Army Air Service adopted the SPAD XIII as its primary fighter, and by mid-1918, 15 of 16 American pursuit squadrons were flying SPADs. American pilots, fresh and well-trained, brought aggressive tactics and seemingly unlimited numbers to the Western Front. German pilots found themselves outnumbered and often outperformed by opponents flying superior machines. Eddie Rickenbacker, America's top ace with 26 victories, scored most of his kills in a SPAD XIII. His aircraft, marked with the famous hat-in-the-ring insignia of the 94th Aero Squadron, became one of the most recognised fighters of the war. Rickenbacker later wrote, quote, "The SPAD was the best ship I flew. It was strong as an ox, fast as lightning, and could take punishment that would have destroyed other fighters. I once came back with 37 bullet holes, and the aircraft still flew perfectly. The Germans learned to fear that sound. The roar of our Hispano-Suiza engines meant death was coming from above." End quote. Frank Luke, the balloon buster who achieved 18 victories in just 17 days, also flew the SPAD XIII. His specialty was attacking heavily defended German observation balloons, suicidal missions that most pilots avoided. The SPAD's speed and structural strength allowed Luke to dive through intense anti-aircraft, fire, destroy the balloon, and escape before German fighters could intercept him. Between September 12 and September 29, 1918, Luke destroyed 14 balloons and 4 aircraft, a feat unprecedented in World War I. His success demonstrated another advantage of the SPAD: it could survive the ground fire that shredded more fragile fighters. German pilots by 1918 had developed a grudging, almost fearful respect for the SPAD. Lieutenant Fritz Rumi of Jasta 5, with 45 victories to his credit, wrote in August 1918, quote, "The SPAD has proven to be the most dangerous opponent we face. It combines speed that we cannot match, structural strength that makes it almost impossible to shoot down with a quick burst, and firepower that can destroy our aircraft in seconds. Worse, their pilots have learned to use these advantages with devastating effectiveness. They control the altitude. They control when to engage. We can only react. It is a bitter thing to admit, but the French have built a superior fighting machine." End quote. The SPAD's dominance wasn't absolute. Germany's introduction of the Fokker D.VII in May 1918 finally gave German pilots a fighter that could compete on relatively equal terms. The D.VII had excellent climb rate, good high-altitude performance, and superb handling characteristics. In the hands of experienced pilots like Ernst Udet or Hermann Göring, it could hold its own against SPADs. But by mid-1918, Germany was running out of experienced pilots, fuel shortages limited training, and new pilots were arriving at the front with barely 20 hours of flight time. Meanwhile, Allied air forces were producing hundreds of SPADs, flown by increasingly skilled pilots who had mastered the aircraft's strengths. The final verdict on the SPAD came not from combat reports, but from the most telling statistic of all: production numbers. France built approximately 6,000 SPAD XIIs and 8,472 SPAD XIIIs, making the 13 the most produced fighter of World War I. These weren't just numbers on a factory floor. These were combat aircraft, flying daily missions, engaging German fighters, escorting bombers, and establishing air superiority that Germany could not break. By the autumn of 1918, German air power was collapsing under the weight of material inferiority, tactical defeat, and sheer exhaustion. The once mighty Jagdstaffels that had terrorized Allied skies in 1916 were reduced to flying defensive patrols, trying to protect German observation aircraft and bombers from the swarms of SPADs that controlled the sky. When the armistice came on November 11, 1918, one of the specific provisions demanded by the Allies was the surrender of all frontline German aircraft, particularly Fokker D.VIIs. The Germans had feared that the Allies would specifically demand SPADs be excluded from post-war use to prevent other nations from obtaining them. But the French had no such concerns. They knew that the SPAD's reputation spoke for itself. In the years after the war, when aviation historians and former pilots gathered to discuss the fighters of World War I, the SPAD inevitably featured prominently. German aces who had survived the war often expressed mixed feelings about the aircraft. On one hand, it represented a humbling reminder of their ultimate defeat. On the other, they respected it as a worthy opponent. Hermann Göring, who would command the Luftwaffe in World War II, flew against SPADs extensively in 1918 while commanding Jagdgeschwader 1, the famous flying circus once led by Manfred von Richthofen. In a 1937 interview, before his reputation was forever tarnished by his role in the Nazi regime, Göring reflected on his World War I experiences, quote, "We learned to fear the sound of the SPAD, that distinctive roar of the Hispano-Suiza engine. It meant trouble was coming. The French pilots in their SPADs were aggressive, well-trained, and flew an aircraft that matched or exceeded our own in every category that mattered. Speed, climb, firepower, durability. We could only beat them through superior tactics and positioning, and by 1918 we rarely had either." End quote. The technical legacy of the SPAD extended far beyond its combat record. The Hispano-Suiza engine that powered it became one of the most influential aircraft engines of the interwar period, licensed and built by manufacturers around the world. The structural design philosophy, prioritizing strength and speed over maneuverability, influenced fighter development through the 1920s and 1930s. The Soviet Union, the United States, Britain, Italy, Belgium, Poland, and numerous other nations operated SPADs in the years after World War I, testament to the aircraft's effectiveness and versatility. Perhaps most significantly, the SPAD demonstrated that industrial capacity and engineering excellence could overcome tactical brilliance. German pilots in 1916 were generally better trained, more experienced, and flying from established tactical doctrine. But French industry, recognizing the need for a superior fighter, developed and produced the SPAD in numbers that ultimately overwhelmed German air power. This lesson, that material superiority can defeat tactical excellence, would echo through military aviation in the decades to come. The transformation of German opinion about the SPAD, from dismissive mockery to grudging respect to near fear, happened remarkably quickly. In September 1916, German pilots were laughing about the clumsy French furniture. By mid-1917, they were issuing cautious tactical advisories. By 1918, they were simply trying to survive encounters with aircraft they knew were superior. This wasn't a story of German incompetence or cowardice. Quite the opposite. German pilots fought bravely and skillfully throughout the war. But they were fighting opponents who had learned to exploit every advantage their machines provided, and those machines, the SPAD XII and especially the SPAD XIII, were exceptional when Georges Guynemer was killed in action on September 11, 1917. Shot down while flying his SPAD XIII over Belgium, the French nation mourned one of its greatest heroes. He had scored 53 confirmed victories and died at just 22 years old. The circumstances of his death remain mysterious. His body and aircraft were never found, possibly obliterated by artillery fire, possibly buried by German troops who couldn't identify the wreckage. But his legacy, and the legacy of the aircraft he helped prove in combat, endured. German pilots who fought against Guynemer spoke of him with respect, even awe. Kurt Wissemann, the German ace credited with shooting down Guynemer, though this claim remains disputed, was himself killed just 2 weeks later. The brutal arithmetic of aerial combat spared no one, not French aces, not German veterans. The SPAD XIII continued flying on the Western Front long after Guynemer's death, piloted by hundreds of Allied aviators who carried the fight to Germany with increasing effectiveness. The peak performance of the SPAD XIII was remarkable for 1917 and 1918. With a maximum speed of 138 miles per hour, it was faster than the German Fokker D.VII's 124 miles per hour. Its service ceiling of 21,800 feet allowed it to operate at altitudes where German fighters struggled. Its rate of climb, particularly with the improved engines introduced in 1918, gave it a decisive advantage in securing altitude before combat. These weren't marginal differences, they were combat decisive advantages that skilled pilots exploited ruthlessly. The twin Vickers machine guns, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, had an effective range of about 300 yards and a combined rate of fire approaching 1,000 rounds per minute. This created a cone of destruction that made the SPAD lethal in the hands of an accurate marksman. René Fonck's economy with ammunition, his ability to down multiple opponents with minimal expenditure, showcased what the SPAD could do when flown by a master, but even average pilots found the SPAD's firepower gave them a fighting chance against more experienced opponents. The structural strength of the SPAD proved crucial in ways that went beyond combat damage. Pilots could dive the aircraft to its terminal velocity without fear of structural failure. The wings wouldn't rip off, the fuselage wouldn't buckle, the controls remained responsive even at extreme speeds. This reliability gave pilots confidence to push the aircraft to its limits, executing maneuvers that would have been suicidal in more fragile machines. German pilots learned this the hard way. Shooting at a SPAD and seeing hits register without the aircraft falling apart was a disconcerting experience. The SPAD required 20 or 30 good hits to bring down, where a Nieuport might succumb to a handful. By the summer of 1918, the combination of SPAD superiority and overwhelming Allied numbers had effectively neutered German air power. The Great Spring Offensive of 1918, Germany's last desperate attempt to win the war before American forces arrived in overwhelming strength, relied heavily on artillery and infantry tactics, precisely because German commanders knew they couldn't count on air superiority. SPADs and other Allied fighters controlled the skies, providing reconnaissance, directing artillery, attacking German ground forces, and shooting down German aircraft with monotonous regularity. The statistics from the final months of the war tell the story clearly. In August 1918, Allied air forces flew more than 40,000 sorties. German air forces managed less than 10,000. SPAD-equipped squadrons led the way in both offensive and defensive operations, their superior performance allowing them to range deep into German-held territory with relative impunity. German pilots, flying defensive patrols and trying to protect their own observation aircraft and bombers, found themselves overwhelmed by numbers and outperformed by machines they couldn't match. The psychological impact on German pilots was severe. Men who had once flown with aggressive confidence now approached combat with dread, knowing they were outmatched in equipment and outnumbered in aircraft. Survival became the primary goal, victory a distant hope. This collapse of morale, combined with fuel shortages that limited training and operations, meant that even the arrival of excellent aircraft like the Fokker D.VII couldn't reverse Germany's aerial defeat. When the war ended, many SPADs were simply abandoned or scrapped, a common fate for military equipment when peace arrives. But some were preserved, recognized even then as historically significant. The SPAD XIII that Eddie Rickenbacker flew during his most successful combat missions was eventually restored and now resides in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The aircraft that Frank Luke flew on his final mission, cobbled together from parts of 3 different SPADs, stands in Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport as a memorial to Arizona's most famous aviator. These preserved aircraft allow modern observers to appreciate what German pilots faced in 1917 and 1918. Standing next to a SPAD XIII, you can sense its robust construction, the substantial framework, the powerful-looking engine, the business-like simplicity of its design. This wasn't an aircraft built for show or grace, it was built to fight and win. And it did, comprehensively and decisively. The German pilots who laughed at the first SPADs in 1916, calling them flying furniture and delivery trucks, learned a lesson that military forces throughout history have had to learn repeatedly. Never underestimate an opponent's engineering, never assume that your current superiority will last, and never mock an adversary until you've proven yourself in actual combat. The French didn't build the SPAD to be beautiful or elegant. They built it to kill German aircraft and establish air superiority. They succeeded brilliantly. By 1918, the sound of a Hispano-Suiza engine, that deep, powerful roar, had become a sound of dread to German pilots. They knew what was coming, a fast, strong, heavily armed fighter, piloted by increasingly skilled aviators who had learned to exploit every advantage. The jokes about flying furniture had long since died away, replaced by tactical warnings, survival instructions, and the grim acknowledgement that the French had built something exceptional. The SPAD XII and SPAD XIII didn't just outperform German fighters, they outclimbed them, outdove them, outlasted them in structural endurance, and outgunned them in firepower. In the final analysis, that combination proved unbeatable. German pilots adapted, German industry tried to respond, German commanders adjusted tactics. None of it mattered. The SPAD had established a superiority that Germany couldn't overcome, and so the laughter turned to respect, the respect to caution, and the caution ultimately to something approaching fear. When the war ended and the survivors went home, German veterans carried with them memories of the aircraft that had helped defeat them. The SPAD had earned its place in aviation history not through propaganda or mythology, but through proven combat effectiveness. It had outclimbed everything Germany could field, and in doing so had rewritten the rules of aerial warfare for a generation. The evolution of SPAD tactics throughout 1918 revealed something that German intelligence found deeply troubling. Allied pilots weren't just flying better aircraft, they were developing systematic approaches to aerial warfare that treated individual dogfights as part of a larger strategic campaign. French squadrons like the famous Storks, les Cigognes, operated their SPADs with mathematical precision, establishing patrol patterns that made it nearly impossible for German aircraft to operate over certain sectors without running into superior Allied formations positioned at advantageous altitudes. Captain Armand Pinsard, commanding one of the Stork squadrons, developed what he called the layered defense, multiple flights of SPADs stacked at different altitudes from 12,000 feet up to 21,000 feet, each flight ready to dive on German formations that appeared below them. German bomber crews attempting to attack Allied positions found themselves running a gauntlet, where every 1,000 feet of altitude brought them into range of fresh SPAD patrols. Lieutenant Walter Göring, no relation to Hermann, flew as an observer in German two-seater reconnaissance aircraft during the final year of the war. His diary entries from July and August 1918 chronicle the increasing impossibility of his missions. Quote, July 14th, attempted reconnaissance over Chateau Thierry, encountered SPADs at 14,000 feet. Pilot dived for clouds. They followed us down effortlessly, only escaped because they broke off to attack another German aircraft. Our photographs worthless, July 22nd. Mission cancelled after 3 SPADs were spotted at 19,000 feet. Before we even crossed the lines, our aircraft cannot climb high enough to avoid them. August 3rd, completed mission, but lost 2 aircraft from our flight. The SPADs came from above as always. They have perfected this tactic and we have no answer. August 19th, ground forces complaining they receive no aerial reconnaissance. We are trying, but the cost is becoming unbearable, end quote. The American entry into SPAD operations brought a new dimension that particularly troubled German air commanders: aggressive pursuit of German aircraft deep into their own territory. American pilots, perhaps lacking the cautious experience of French and British veterans who had survived years of combat, flew their SPADs with reckless aggression that achieved remarkable results. The 94th Aero Squadron, America's first to see combat, made a specialty of dawn patrols that caught German aircraft just after takeoff when they were low, slow, and vulnerable. Captain Kenneth Marr of the 94th developed what he called the Sunrise Surprise. Flights of 4 SPADs would cross into German territory at first light, flying at maximum altitude to avoid detection, then dive on German airfields just as aircraft were taking off for morning patrols. The speed of the SPAD in a dive, combined with surprise and the vulnerability of the aircraft just leaving the ground, made these attacks devastatingly effective. German airfields began posting standing patrols at altitude before dawn, but this consumed precious fuel and exhausted pilots, who then had to fly combat missions throughout the day. On August 1st, 1918, Marr led his flight in an attack on a German airfield near Coincy. His combat report described the action, quote, crossed lines at 21,000 feet, dawn breaking, spotted German aerodrome with aircraft on field, counted at least 15 machines, some with engines running, began diving attack from east with sun behind us, reached approximately 400 miles per hour in dive, opened fire at 500 yards on Fokker D.VII just lifting off, observed strikes, enemy aircraft crashed immediately beyond field boundary, continued dive, fired on parked aircraft, saw fabric tear and structure collapse on one machine. Lieutenant Chambers destroyed second aircraft taking off. Lieutenant Taylor strafed hangars, observed fire start, climbed away at full throttle, no pursuit due to surprise and destruction of German fighters, estimate 4 enemy aircraft destroyed on ground or immediately after takeoff, all SPADs returned safely, end quote. This kind of aggressive combat, taking the fight directly to German airfields, represented a confidence born from flying superior machines. French and British squadrons had occasionally attempted similar tactics earlier in the war, but usually suffered prohibitive losses. The SPAD's combination of speed, climb rate, and structural strength made such deep penetration missions survivable. German pilots found themselves fighting defensively over their own airfields, unable to establish the altitude advantage that might have allowed them to counter SPAD attacks effectively. The balloon-busting missions flown by Frank Luke and other SPAD pilots deserve special attention because they demonstrated another area where the aircraft's unique characteristics proved decisive. German observation balloons, called Draken, were vital for artillery spotting and battlefield observation. They were also heavily defended, protected by anti-aircraft batteries, machine gun nests, and standing patrols of fighters. Attacking a balloon required diving through intense ground fire, destroying a target that was often being rapidly winched down, then escaping through the same defensive fire while German fighters dove on you from above. Previous Allied fighters attempting balloon attacks had suffered terrible casualties. The SPAD changed this equation. Its diving speed allowed it to get in and out of the defensive envelope quickly. Its structural strength meant it could absorb ground fire that would have shredded more fragile aircraft, and its climb rate allowed it to regain altitude and fight off pursuing German fighters. Luke's success wasn't just about his considerable courage and skill, it was about flying an aircraft that made such missions survivable. Between September 12th and September 18th, 1918, Luke destroyed 8 balloons, each one requiring him to dive through defensive fire that often resembled a solid wall of exploding shells. His SPAD absorbed hundreds of hits during these missions, returning with fabric torn, struts shattered, control wires partially severed, yet it kept flying. On September 18th, Luke destroyed 3 balloons in 10 minutes, a feat that required him to dive through 3 separate defensive zones, destroy each target while under intense fire, then climb away to search for the next target. German defenders, watching this lone SPAD attack repeatedly despite their best efforts to shoot it down, reported feeling helpless against an aircraft that simply refused to fall. Luke's final mission on September 29, 1918, demonstrated both the SPAD's capabilities and its limitations. Flying alone against orders, he destroyed 3 balloons in quick succession, then engaged multiple German fighters. He shot down 2 Fokker D.VIIs, but his SPAD, already damaged by ground fire from the balloon attacks, was hit repeatedly in the subsequent air combat. Luke managed to land his crippled aircraft in a field near Mervaux, but was shot and killed by German infantry as he attempted to defend himself with his pistol. His SPAD, examination by German engineers who studied the wreckage, had absorbed 47 bullet and shell fragment hits, any one of which might have downed a less robust aircraft. The German analysis of Luke's SPAD, preserved in captured documents, revealed how thoroughly German respect for the aircraft had evolved. Quote, "Structural examination reveals exceptional build quality and strength. Primary wing spars show no signs of failure, despite multiple hits and extreme stress loads. Engine maintained function with cylinder damage evident. Cooling system punctured in multiple locations, yet aircraft clearly flew for extended period after damage occurred. Ammunition feed system show sophisticated design, preventing jamming. Control system redundancy observed. Multiple control cables provided backup for primary flight controls. Assessment. This aircraft represents engineering approach prioritizing combat survivability over weight optimization. German fighters achieve superior maneuverability through lighter construction, but suffer catastrophic failure from less damage. Combat experience suggests SPAD philosophy may be superior for sustained operations." End quote. This assessment, written in October 1918, came too late to influence German aircraft design. By the time German engineers fully understood what made the SPAD so effective, the war was weeks from ending. But the lessons learned would influence post-war aviation development, particularly the recognition that structural strength and combat survivability might be more important than marginal advantages in maneuverability. The Italian front provided another proving ground for SPAD superiority, though this theatre received less attention than the Western Front. Italian pilots flying SPADs against Austro-Hungarian aircraft found the same advantages their French and American counterparts enjoyed. The SPAD could climb above Austrian fighters, attack at will, and escape when outnumbered. Italian ace Fulco Ruffo de Calabria, flying a SPAD XIII, scored 20 victories, many against the capable Austrian pilots of companies like Flick 41J and Flick 51J. De Calabria's combat reports consistently noted the SPAD's superiority. Quote, The Austrian pilots are brave and their aircraft reasonably capable, but the SPAD gives us control of the engagement. We choose when to fight and when to withdraw. This advantage proves decisive in nearly every encounter." End quote. The Austrian pilots faced the same frustration as their German allies, fighting an opponent who could dictate the terms of combat through superior performance. By September 1918, Austrian air units were suffering unsustainable losses to Italian SPADs, contributing to the collapse of Austro-Hungarian military effectiveness in the final months of the war. Back on the Western Front, the final Allied offensives of 1918 demonstrated how completely air superiority had shifted. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive that began September 26th, American forces supported by SPAD fighters achieved aerial dominance so complete that German ground forces reported seeing almost no friendly aircraft. Over 840 Allied aircraft, including hundreds of SPADs, operated over the battlefield, providing reconnaissance, attacking German positions, and shooting down the handful of German fighters that attempted to contest the airspace. German pilot Lieutenant Franz Buchner of Jasta 13 flew defensive missions during the Meuse-Argonne fighting. His account, written after the war, captured the hopelessness of the German situation. Quote, "We were ordered to provide air cover for retreating ground forces. 6 aircraft from our Jasta took off at dawn. At 8,000 feet we encountered perhaps 30 Allied fighters, mostly SPADs. We were immediately engaged from above and below simultaneously. Lieutenant Schmidt was shot down in the first seconds. I saw his aircraft disintegrate, simply come apart in the air from the concentrated fire. I attempted to climb away, but 4 SPADs followed. My Fokker could not match their climb rate. I dove for ground level and escaped through a combination of luck and the fact that the SPADs broke off to attack other targets. When I returned to the aerodrome, I was the only one from our patrol to land. 5 aircraft lost, 5 pilots dead or captured, and we had not shot down a single Allied machine. That was the reality of air combat in autumn 1918. We were simply overwhelmed." End quote. The overwhelming nature of Allied air superiority in the final months of the war cannot be overstated. German pilots were flying obsolete aircraft, suffering from inadequate training due to fuel shortages, outnumbered 5 or 10 to 1, and facing opponents in aircraft like the SPAD that were superior in nearly every performance category. The psychological weight of this situation crushed German morale. Pilots who had once flown aggressively now focused purely on survival, avoiding combat when possible, fleeing when engaged, hoping to live through another day. The SPAD's reliability also proved crucial as the war ground toward its conclusion. French and American squadrons were flying multiple missions per day, putting enormous stress on aircraft and engines. The SPAD's robust construction and the reliable Hispano-Suiza engine meant that aircraft could operate under this intense tempo with acceptable maintenance requirements. German fighters, particularly later war emergency designs, often suffered mechanical failures that grounded them at crucial moments. The Fokker D.VII was reliable, but Germany's industrial situation meant spare parts were scarce and quality control was declining. SPADs, backed by French and American industrial capacity, kept flying. Squadron maintenance records from American units in October and November 1918 show remarkable serviceability rates. The 94th Aero Squadron reported 85% of their SPADs combat ready on any given day, compared to intelligence estimates suggesting German units were operating at 40 to 50% serviceability. This meant that even with roughly equal numbers of aircraft assigned, Allied squadrons could put far more fighters in the air for any given mission. The compounding advantage of better aircraft, better trained pilots, superior numbers, and higher serviceability rates created a situation where German air power effectively ceased to exist as a meaningful force. The innovation in SPAD tactics continued right through the war's final weeks. French ace René Fonck, whose skill and precision were unmatched, developed what he called the economy patrol, a method of using the SPAD's superior altitude capability to locate multiple targets, then systematically destroying them with minimal ammunition expenditure and risk. Fonck would climb his SPAD to 22,000 feet, above the operational ceiling of most German fighters, then patrol assigned sectors waiting for targets to appear below. When he spotted German aircraft, he would carefully set up his attack, positioning the sun behind him, calculating the dive angle to maximize speed while maintaining control and planning his escape route before committing to the attack. His execution was surgical. Fonck would dive, reach his firing position, fire a short burst with deadly accuracy, and be climbing away before German pilots realized they were under attack. His famous 6 victories in one day, achieved on May 9, 1918, followed this pattern exactly. He destroyed each aircraft with an average of 15 rounds, less than 1 second of fire per kill, then climbed back to altitude to search for the next target. His SPAD's ability to climb quickly back to 20,000 feet allowed him to repeat this process 6 times in a single afternoon. German pilots who survived encounters with Fonck described a phantom, an aircraft that appeared from nowhere, killed with mechanical precision, and vanished before they could react. This wasn't luck or even pure skill, it was the exploitation of the SPAD's performance envelope by a master tactician who understood exactly what his aircraft could do. The American ace of aces, Eddie Rickenbacker, employed similar tactics but with a distinctly American variation, emphasizing aggressive pursuit. Rickenbacker believed in pressing attacks until the enemy was completely destroyed, using the SPAD's speed and firepower to chase down damaged aircraft and ensure kills. His philosophy, quote, "Never assume they're done until you see them hit the ground," end quote, led him to follow damaged German aircraft at high speed, often diving from high altitude to catch fighters trying to escape. On September 25, 1918, Rickenbacker engaged 2 German observation aircraft escorted by 5 Fokker D.VIIs. The German fighters positioned themselves above the vulnerable 2-seaters, standard defensive tactics. Rickenbacker, flying with his wingman Lieutenant Reed Chambers, climbed his SPAD to 20,000 feet before beginning his attack. The subsequent combat demonstrated everything the SPAD did well. Rickenbacker dove on the German formation from superior altitude, reaching speeds the German fighters couldn't match. He fired on the leading Fokker D.VII, which attempted to turn into the attack. The SPAD's twin guns shredded the German fighter's wing, and it fell away out of control. Chambers engaged a second Fokker, while Rickenbacker, maintaining his speed advantage, climbed back above the remaining German fighters. The 3 surviving Fokkers, recognizing they were outmatched, broke formation and dove away at maximum speed. Rickenbacker followed one down to 5,000 feet, firing multiple bursts until the German aircraft began trailing smoke and crashed near Verdun. The entire combat, from the initial attack to final kill, took less than 3 minutes. Rickenbacker's SPAD had absorbed several hits from the Fokker's machine guns, but showed no significant damage. The structural strength that had saved Robert Johnson's P-47 in World War II had its predecessor in the SPAD's robust airframe. By October 1918, the German High Command was receiving regular reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture of their air services situation. Weekly intelligence summaries documented the growing disparity. Quote, "Week of October 6th. Jastas across all fronts report increasing difficulty maintaining standing patrols due to fuel limitations and aircraft serviceability issues. Encounters with Allied fighters, particularly SPADs, result in disproportionate losses. Ratio approximately 4 German aircraft lost for every Allied aircraft destroyed. Pilot replacements arriving at front with insufficient training. Many have fewer than 15 hours solo flying time. Recommendation: consider withdrawing remaining experienced pilots to form nucleus of post-war air service. Current situation unsustainable." End quote. This was the death spiral of an air force that had once dominated European skies. The SPAD and other Allied fighters hadn't just defeated German air power through superior performance. They had created a situation where Germany couldn't replace losses, couldn't train pilots, couldn't even maintain existing aircraft at operationally effective levels. The material and industrial advantages that the SPAD represented, products of functioning economies with access to resources and manufacturing capacity, had overwhelmed German technical skill and tactical doctrine. On November 10th, 1918, one day before the armistice, American SPAD squadrons flew their final combat missions of the war. The 27th Aero Squadron, operating near Verdun, encountered a German fighter patrol in what would become one of the last dogfights of World War I. 4 SPADs engaged 6 Fokker D.VIIs in a swirling fight that ranged from 15,000 feet down to treetop level. 2 German fighters were shot down, 1 SPAD was damaged but returned to base. As the American pilots climbed away from the engagement, they could see German fighters breaking off and heading east, presumably having received word that the armistice was imminent. The war that had begun with primitive aircraft barely capable of controlled flight was ending with sophisticated fighters like the SPAD dominating skies over a devastated landscape. When the guns fell silent on November 11th, SPAD-equipped squadrons controlled the Western Front's airspace so completely that German pilots in some sectors hadn't attempted daylight operations in weeks. The transformation from German mockery in 1916 to total Allied aerial superiority in 1918 had taken just 26 months. In that time, the SPAD had evolved from an untested design to the most effective fighter of World War I, and German pilots had learned that underestimating an opponent's engineering prowess was a mistake measured in blood and burning wreckage. The post-war assessment of World War I fighters placed the SPAD XIII at or near the top of every category that mattered in combat. Maximum speed, 138 miles per hour, faster than all but a handful of late-war German types. Rate of climb, 6,500 feet in 4.5 minutes, superior to most opponents. Service ceiling, 21,800 feet, high enough to control engagement altitude. Structural strength, capable of withstanding combat damage that would destroy other fighters. Firepower, twin synchronized machine guns with 800 rounds total ammunition. These weren't marginal advantages, they were combat-decisive differences that determined who controlled the sky. The human cost of the SPAD's effectiveness was borne by German pilots, who found themselves outmatched by an opponent they had initially dismissed. Thousands of German aviators died in combat against SPADs, shot down by pilots who exploited every advantage their superior machines provided. These weren't warriors lacking courage or skill, they were professionals doing their duty with obsolete equipment against overwhelming odds. The tragedy of their situation was that many recognized the hopelessness, but continued flying because orders required it, and honor demanded it. Lieutenant Oliver von Beaulieu-Marconnay, a German fighter pilot who survived the war with 25 victories, wrote in his memoir published in 1928, quote, "We learned to recognize the sound of different Allied engines, the rotary whine of the Camel, the smooth drone of the SE Farbe, and the deep, powerful roar of the SPAD. Of all these sounds, the SPAD's was the one we feared most. It meant an opponent who could climb above us, dive faster than we could follow, and hit us with firepower that tore our aircraft apart. In the final year of the war, hearing that sound often meant death was approaching, and there was little we could do to prevent it." End quote. This fear, expressed by a skilled veteran with 25 kills to his credit, represented the complete reversal from the mockery of 1916. The flying furniture had become an angel of death. The SPAD's influence extended far beyond World War I. In the 1920s and 1930s, surplus SPADs served with air forces around the world. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Japan, Brazil, Portugal, Peru, and numerous other nations operated SPADs in various roles. Some were used as trainers, teaching new generations of pilots the fundamentals of fighter tactics. Others served as frontline fighters well into the 1920s, their performance still adequate against potential opponents. The Japanese army, which had operated a small number of SPADs during World War I, carefully studied the aircraft's design and incorporated lessons learned into their own fighter development programs. The emphasis on structural strength, diving speed, and firepower that characterized the SPAD influenced Japanese fighters like the Kai-10 and later the Kai-27. The irony of the SPAD's technology contributing to the development of aircraft that would fight against Allied forces in World War II was not lost on aviation historians. In Hollywood, the SPAD became the iconic fighter of World War I aviation films. Movies like Hell's Angels, The Dawn Patrol, and countless others featured SPADs because they were available, photogenic, and audiences recognized them as symbols of aerial combat. This cinematic immortality ensured that even people with no interest in aviation history knew the SPAD's distinctive silhouette. The aircraft that German pilots had mocked as furniture became an enduring symbol of aerial warfare's romantic era. Modern analysis using computer modelling and historical performance data has only confirmed what combat records suggested. The SPAD XIII was the most effective all-around fighter of World War I. While the Fokker D.VII had superior low-speed handling and the Sopwith Camel had tighter turning ability, the SPAD's combination of speed, climb, structural strength, and firepower made it the most dangerous opponent in the sky. Statistical analysis of combat results shows that SPAD-equipped squadrons achieved better kill ratios, suffered lower losses, and completed missions more successfully than units flying other fighters. When the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. assembled its World War I aviation collection, curators gave the SPAD XIII prominent placement. The museum's SPAD, restored to represent the aircraft flown by French ace Georges Guynemer, allows visitors to appreciate the fighter's robust construction and purposeful design. Standing beside it, you can imagine German pilots in 1918 watching formations of these fighters climbing overhead, knowing that combat was coming and that their own aircraft couldn't match the SPAD's capabilities. The story of the SPAD is ultimately a story about underestimating opponents, about the danger of assuming that initial impressions tell the whole truth, and about how engineering excellence combined with industrial capacity can overcome tactical advantages. German pilots in 1916 looked at the SPAD XII and saw an ungainly machine that violated their understanding of fighter design. They missed the significance of its powerful engine, its robust structure, and its potential for development. By the time they recognized their error, the improved SPAD XIII had arrived and Allied industry was producing it by the thousands. The laughter of 1916 became the fear of 1918, and in between, the SPAD proved that sometimes the aircraft that looks wrong can be exactly right. It outclimbed everything. Germany fielded, outdove everything that tried to follow, outlasted everything that shot at it, and outfought everything that challenged it. In the brutal arithmetic of aerial warfare, those advantages were all that mattered, and so the sky, which Germany had once dominated with confidence and skill, belonged to the Allies. The thunder of Hispano-Suiza engines, the whistle of SPADs diving at terminal velocity, the hammer of twin Vickers guns. These sounds marked the end of German air superiority and the beginning of a new era in aerial combat. The German pilots who survived remembered the SPAD not as the furniture they had mocked, but as the opponent who taught them that in war, respect must be earned through combat and superiority proven through results. The SPAD had done both, decisively and permanently,